"Are you my wife?" he asked in shock, eyes wide, as he left the mistress wearing nothing and begged her for a passionate night. "Hello, my precious, loyal, more than gold, more than diamond family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. From my heart to yours, I love you so deeply. May God bless you, keep you, and wrap your life in peace and joy. Today, my Queen Binta sends her love. She misses you all and asked me to tell you, you are always in her heart. And now, from Binta, a tender prayer soaked in love for her beautiful sisters. Dear Lord, hold my sisters close today, wipe their tears, ease their worries, wrap their hearts in peace, and remind them they are never alone. Let every breath they take be filled with strength, every step with grace, and every moment with love that never ends. Bless them beyond what they can see, heal what's hidden, answer what's silent, and fill their lives with joy that overflows. Amen. Please like this video, comment with love, and remember, we are one family. And on April 8th, me and Binta will go on our honeymoon. It's also her birthday. Wish her in advance, my beautiful family. Let's reach 20,000 subscribers with love before that special day. From me and Binta, we love you, deeply, always. The crystal chandelier cast golden light across the luxury hotel suite as Abigail stood in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The champagne glass in her hand trembled, sending ripples across the amber liquid. For a moment, she felt suspended in time, caught between the woman she had been and the woman she had become. The plush carpet muffled her entrance, but she hadn't tried to be quiet. She hadn't expected this scene. The charity gala downstairs had been her first major social event since her transformation. Physical, yes, but more importantly, spiritual. Dr. Maya Wilson, her best friend and savior of the past 6 months, had convinced her to attend. "It's time to show the world who you really are," Maya had said. Abigail had agreed, never imagining she would find herself here in Suite 1208, witnessing this. Her path to this moment had been indirect but somehow inevitable. Downstairs at the gala, she had overheard a conversation that Jacob was taking, his companion, to room 1208. Something compelled her to see with her own eyes what had become of the man she had once loved with her whole heart. She told herself it was closure she sought, but perhaps it was confirmation, proof that her decision to leave had been not just necessary, but right. Before her, Jacob Kim froze mid-sentence, his tie loosened and shirt partially unbuttoned. The room reeked of expensive scotch, Macallan 25, his favorite for celebrations. Behind him on the king-sized bed, a woman scrambled to cover herself with the silk sheets, her eyes wide with shock, long blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders. "Shit," the woman hissed, clutching the sheets tighter. Abigail barely noticed her. Her eyes were fixed on Jacob, the man she had pledged her life to 4 years ago. The man whose approval she had desperately sought until it nearly destroyed her. The man who now stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "Abigail," Jacob whispered, her name emerging as a question, his voice breaking as recognition dawned in his eyes. He blinked rapidly as if trying to dispel an illusion. 6 months. 6 months since she had walked out of their penthouse with nothing but a suitcase and the tattered remains of her self-worth. 6 months of healing, of rediscovering the woman she had been before his criticism had hollowed her out. 6 months, during which he had not once actually tried to find her, not that she had wanted him to. The woman he'd been pursuing for months stood before him transformed, her skin glowing with vitality, free from the harsh products he had insisted she use. Her natural curls, which he had suggested she straighten for professional settings, now framed her face in a halo of elegance. The burgundy gown accentuated curves he'd somehow forgotten existed. Her eyes, once perpetually downcast in his presence, now held his gaze steadily, unflinchingly. She was the woman he had married, The woman he had driven away, and now a woman he clearly didn't recognize. "Are you my wife?" he asked in shock, eyes wide, as he stumbled toward Abigail, reaching for her hands. The scent of scotch wafted from him, stronger now. He was drunk, but not so drunk that he didn't know what he was saying. "Please, can we talk? Just one night. I need to explain." The audacity of his question ignited something primal within her. With precise control, Abigail set her champagne glass on a nearby console table. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough for him to see the strength in hers. "Yes, Jacob, I am your wife," she said, her voice steady and cool. "But you seem to have forgotten that fact." "Shut!" Slap came swiftly, the crack of her palm against his cheek echoing in the silent room. It wasn't done in anger, but in finality, the period at the end of a sentence too long in the writing. Jacob's hand rose to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition, perhaps, of all he had thrown away. For a fleeting moment, she glimpsed the man he had been when they'd first met, vulnerable, genuine, capable of seeing her clearly. But that man had disappeared years ago, replaced by the stranger before her. "I didn't come here for you," Abigail said, her voice unwavering. "I came for myself, to reclaim the spaces I once allowed you to drive me from." Behind him, the blonde woman gathered her clothes, slipping into the bathroom without a word. Smart woman, Abigail thought briefly. She recognized a moment not meant for witnesses. "You look—" Jacob started, his voice trailing off as he searched for words adequate to describe the transformation before him. His eyes traveled over her with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Like myself," Abigail finished for him. "This is who I've always been, Jacob. You just never bothered to see it." She turned to leave, but his hand caught her wrist, not roughly but with desperation. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I've been trying to find you. I've been looking for months." Her laugh was brittle. "No, Jacob, you never tried to find me. Your ego just couldn't accept that I left." "That's not true," he insisted, fumbling for his phone with his free hand while maintaining his gentle but insistent hold on her wrist. "Look." Reluctantly, Abigail glanced at the screen he thrust toward her. It displayed dozens of draft texts to her number, messages never sent, each time stamped over the past 6 months. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to be without you. I miss your mind, the way you see the world. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I see what I did now. I drive past Maya's house sometimes, just to know you're safe. Last night I dreamed you came home, and I promised to be better." The timestamps showed late nights, early mornings, 3 a.m. confessions composed but never delivered, messages written in moments of clarity or desperation, then second-guessed and abandoned. Something complicated passed through Abigail, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first seed of understanding. The Jacob she had left would never have admitted vulnerability, would never have acknowledged his own failings. These unsent texts revealed a different side of him, one she had thought long dead. "You never sent these," she observed, her voice softer but no less resolute. She gently extracted her wrist from his grip. "I didn't have the right," Jacob admitted, his eyes fixed on her face as if memorizing it. "After what I did to you, how I made you feel about yourself. I didn't deserve to disrupt the peace you'd found." The blonde emerged from the bathroom, fully dressed now, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. "I'll see myself out," she mumbled, slipping past them both. Neither Abigail nor Jacob acknowledged her departure. They stood facing each other in the suddenly quiet room, the weight of their shared history pressing down between them. "How did you know I'd be at the gala?" Abigail asked after a moment. "I didn't," Jacob confessed. "I was there for a client. Seeing you, it was like seeing a ghost. The woman I fell in love with. The woman I destroyed with my criticism. His honesty disarmed her slightly. The Jacob she had known would have crafted a more flattering narrative, would have found a way to shift blame or minimize his actions. This raw admission suggested that perhaps his unsent messages weren't merely drunken sentimentality, but reflected genuine reflection. The tension between them was palpable, electric. For a brief moment, Abigail remembered what it had been like. In the beginning, the intensity of their connection, the way their minds had sparked against each other like flint and steel. She remembered how it felt to be seen by him, truly seen, before his vision had become clouded by expectations and superficial standards. "I should go," Abigail said finally, turning toward the door. The moment of connection was dangerous, a siren call to a coastline where she had previously been shipwrecked. "Will you—" Jacob hesitated, vulnerability naked on his face. "Will I see you again?" Abigail paused at the doorway, looking back at him over her shoulder. Her expression was unreadable, a constellation of emotions too complex to name. "That depends," she said quietly, "on whether the man who wrote those unsent texts can exist in the real world, not just in drafts and regrets." She closed the door, gently behind her, leaving Jacob alone with the ghost of what they had been and the faint possibility of what they might, someday, become. In the elevator, Abigail's composure finally cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek, not for the marriage she had lost, but for the woman she had found in its ruins. She wiped it away with steady fingers and pressed the button for the lobby. Maya was waiting, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay? You disappeared for almost an hour. I was about to send a search party." "I'm better than okay," Abigail replied, linking arms with her friend. "I'm free." As they walked through the glittering lobby, Abigail felt Jacob's gaze, on her from the mezzanine above. She didn't look back. The woman she had become didn't need to. Chapter 2. The Beginning. 5 years earlier, Abigail Johnson balanced precariously on a step stool in the university library, stretching to reach, a book on the top shelf. Her fingertips brushed against the spine, pushing it just slightly out of reach. The irony wasn't lost on her. The literal embodiment of knowledge just beyond her grasp, much like her dissertation that seemed to remain frustratingly incomplete, despite months of research. "Allow me," came a voice from below. She glanced down to see a young man with kind eyes and an amused smile. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place among the casual student attire surrounding them. His posture radiated confidence, but not arrogance, a subtle distinction that Abigail noted immediately. "I've got it," Abigail insisted, stretching further. Pride had always been her weakness, the determination to succeed without assistance, to prove herself worthy in spaces that weren't designed for people like her. The step-stool wobbled. She felt herself falling backward, a small gasp escaping her lips before strong hands steadied her shoulders. The touch was firm but respectful, lasting only as long as necessary to ensure her stability. "I think we both know you don't," he teased, reaching past her to easily retrieve the book. "Economic Theory and Practice in Emerging Markets," he read aloud, handing it to her. "Heavy reading." "My dissertation won't write itself," Abigail replied, stepping down. She adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit from childhood that surfaced whenever she felt slightly off balance. "Thank you, Mr. Jacob Kim," he extended his hand. "Visiting lecturer in international business." Abigail Johnson, doctoral candidate in economics. Their handshake lingered a fraction longer than necessary. Something about his confident demeanor both irritated and intrigued her. She wasn't used to being rescued, had spent most of her life proving she didn't need rescuing, but there was something refreshing about his straightforward approach. "Can I buy you a coffee, Abigail Johnson? I'd love to hear about your dissertation." She hesitated, weighing the professional opportunity against her natural caution. "My research is still preliminary. I'm not sure it would interest someone from the business sector." "Try me," he challenged, with a smile that suggested genuine interest rather than professional networking. "I've found that theoretical economics often reveals practical insights that business models miss." That unexpected perspective, the acknowledgement that her academic work had value beyond ivory tower discussions, tipped the scale. "One coffee," she agreed. "But I warn you, once I start talking about economic disparity in developing regions, it's hard to shut me up." "I'm counting on it," Jacob replied. 3 coffee dates later, they were inseparable. Jacob was brilliant, ambitious, and seemingly enchanted by Abigail's passionate intelligence. When she spoke about economic disparity and her research on community development initiatives, he listened with genuine interest, asking questions that pushed her thinking further rather than challenging her premises. "The problem with traditional development models," she explained during their 4th meeting, hands animated as she outlined her central thesis, "is that they're imposed from outside rather than cultivated from within. Communities already have existing economic structures and knowledge systems that external experts often overlook." "Like colonialism in economic clothing," Jacob suggested, earning an appreciative nod from Abigail. "Exactly. And then we wonder why these initiatives fail despite billions in funding." Their conversations spanned economics, politics, art, literature. No topic was off-limits, no perspective dismissed without consideration. In Jacob, Abigail found something rare, someone who challenged her intellectually without attempting to diminish her, who valued her mind as much as her company. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he told her on their first night together, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek as if memorizing her. "You see the world in ways I never considered." Their relationship progressed with the inevitability of economic forces they both studied. Supply meeting demand, mutual benefit creating stable equilibrium. 6 months after they met, Jacob proposed during a weekend trip to the coast, down on one knee as waves crashed against the shore. "My parents might not understand at first," he warned her. "They had certain expectations about who I would marry. Your wealthy Korean family didn't picture you with a black girl from Southside Chicago," Abigail asked, raising an eyebrow. The question was direct, but not accusatory. An acknowledgement of realities they had discussed before. "Their loss," Jacob said, kissing her. "You're extraordinary." The wedding was small but elegant, a compromise between Jacob's desire for an extravagant celebration and Abigail's practical nature. His parents attended, but remained stoically reserved, speaking politely but briefly. To Abigail's mother, cultural divisions were acknowledged but not permitted to overshadow the day. Abigail's mother cried happy tears, whispering, "He better treat you like the queen you are." For the first year, he did. Their apartment filled with books and laughter. They hosted dinner parties where conversations about global economics flowed as freely as the wine. Jacob boasted about Abigail's research to colleagues, introduced her as the brilliant mind that keeps me humble. Nights were spent tangled in each other, mornings lingered over coffee and dreams. "I never thought I'd find someone who challenges me the way you do," Jacob confessed one lazy Sunday morning as sunlight painted patterns across their rumpled sheets. "You make me better." Abigail smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "That's because you actually listen when I speak." "How could I not? You're the smartest person in every room you enter." Those early days were golden, suffused with the kind of love that felt both grounding and exhilarating. Jacob's career at an investment firm was taking off, but he still made time for late-night discussions about Abigail's research, offering insights from his business background that added depth to her economic theories. They moved through the city like conquerors, attending art gallery openings, discovering hidden jazz clubs, debating politics over dinner with friends from diverse backgrounds. Jacob delighted in introducing Abigail to his world of finance and privilege, while she brought him into community organizing meetings and economic symposiums that challenged his perspective. "We're going to change the world," Jacob would say, his arm around her shoulders as they walked home from yet another passionate discussion about global inequality. "You with your brilliant mind, me with my money and connections. Imagine what we could do together." And Abigail had believed him, had believed in them, had believed in the vision they were creating together, where her academic knowledge could be paired with his practical business acumen to create real, lasting change. When Jacob's firm offered him a promotion that came with a corner office and a six-figure salary increase, they celebrated with champagne on their tiny balcony. "We can afford that penthouse now," he murmured against her neck. "The one with the view of the entire city." "Do we need a penthouse?" Abigail questioned. "I like our place. It's cozy. It feels like us." "We deserve the best," Jacob insisted, his enthusiasm contagious. "You deserve the best. Think about the dinner parties we could host. Connecting influential people with your community development contacts. Networking that could actually make a difference." She relented, charmed by his enthusiasm and the vision he painted of their future. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, a master suite larger than their entire previous apartment. Jacob hired a decorator who filled the space with sleek, modern furniture and abstract art that cost more than Abigail's annual university stipend. "It doesn't feel like us," she confessed the first night in their new home. She ran her hand along the cold marble of the kitchen island, missing the worn wooden countertops of their old apartment. "It will," Jacob promised, pulling her close. "This is just the beginning." He was right. It was just the beginning. Not of the life they dreamed, but of a slow, insidious transformation that would nearly destroy them both. Chapter 3. Fading Dreams. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It began with small comments. Jacob suggesting Abigail try a different hairstyle, recommending skincare products all the executives' wives were using, buying her clothes that weren't her style but were more appropriate for business dinners. "I'm just helping you fit in," he would say when she objected. "These people could advance your career too." The first serious argument came 6 months after moving into the penthouse. Abigail had worn her hair natural to a firm dinner, the tight curls framing her face in a way that felt authentic and beautiful to her. In the car ride home, Jacob was unusually quiet. "Something wrong?" Abigail asked, though she already suspected the answer. "You looked beautiful," he said carefully. "But did you notice you were the only woman there with natural hair?" So, I'm just wondering if you're making things harder for yourself than they need to be by being myself." The question hung between them, the first crack in the foundation of mutual respect that had defined their relationship. "By not adapting to the environment," Jacob countered. "It's like going to Japan and refusing to bow. Sometimes you need to honor the cultural norms of the space you're in. Except we're not in Japan, we're in America, where my natural hair is part of my cultural identity." The discussion had ended there, but the undercurrent remained, a new tension that hadn't existed before. Jacob became increasingly focused on appearances, on conformity, on fitting the image of success he was constructing. As Jacob's investment firm flourished, the pressure intensified. Abigail completed her doctorate and secured a position with an economic policy think tank, but Jacob seemed unimpressed. "You could do more with your connections," he told her over dinner one night. "My clients ask what my wife does, and economic research just doesn't have the same ring as running a foundation would." "My work matters," Abigail countered, feeling the familiar heat of defensiveness rising in her chest. "I'm developing policies that could help communities like the one I grew up in." "Of course it matters," Jacob said dismissively, waving his hand as if swatting away her concerns. "I just think you could present yourself better. First impressions are everything in our world." Our world, not her world. Somewhere along the line, her identity had become absorbed into his. The realization was uncomfortable, but easy to dismiss in the moment. A semantic choice rather than a fundamental shift in how he saw her. Their third anniversary passed with barely an acknowledgement. Abigail spent the evening alone, while Jacob, who worked late again. When he came home, she was waiting with a bottle of wine and wearing the lingerie he'd bought her last Christmas, an attempt to recapture the intimacy that had once come so naturally. "Not tonight," he said, loosening his tie. "I have an early meeting." The rejection stung, but it was his glance, a quick critical assessment that found her wanting, that truly wounded. In that brief look, she recognized a pattern that had been developing for months. Jacob no longer saw her, he appraised her. The arguments grew more frequent. Jacob criticized her skin, said she was letting herself go, complained that she didn't make enough effort. Abigail tried everything: expensive creams, painful treatments, endless diets. But nothing satisfied him. The goalposts constantly shifted, the standard of acceptable always just beyond her reach. What hurt most wasn't his criticism, but the realization that the man who had once found her extraordinary now couldn't see her at all. The intellectual connection that had brought them together had been replaced by superficial concerns, by an obsession with appearance that felt foreign to the Jacob she had married. The penthouse began to feel like a gilded cage, its luxurious trappings a poor substitute for genuine connection. Abigail found herself spending more time at the office, burying herself in work that at least gave her a sense of purpose, of impact. When she was home, she and Jacob orbited each other like distant planets, their gravitational pull weakening. With each passing day, "You look tired," Jacob commented one morning as they prepared for their separate days. "You should see someone about those dark circles." Abigail stared at him over her coffee cup. "I was up until 2 working on a policy brief that could help low-income families access better housing. Is that what you see when you look at me?" Dark circles. The question wasn't just about her appearance. It was about what he valued, what he noticed, what mattered to him now. His answer would tell her whether the man she had married still existed. Jacob sighed, the sound heavy with impatience. "I'm trying to help you, Abby. You're representing both of us when you go out in public. I'm not a billboard for Kim Investments. Jacob, I'm a person, your wife. And as my wife, don't you want to present your best self?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Abigail's best self, in Jacob's eyes, had nothing to do with her intelligence, her compassion, her work ethic. It was solely about appearance, about fitting the image he wanted to project to the world. "My best self is the one making a difference in economic policy, the one whose research is being cited in international development programs. The one you apparently no longer see." Jacob checked his watch, already disengaging from the conversation. "We can talk about this later. I'm late for a meeting." But later never came. This pattern repeated itself throughout their 4th year of marriage. Confrontations deferred, concerns dismissed, fundamental disconnections ignored in favor of maintaining the fiction that they were still partners rather than strangers, sharing luxury accommodations. Later that week, Jacob left a brochure on the kitchen counter, a skin rejuvenation clinic that promised transformative results. "Just think about it," he said when she confronted him. "Dr. Lindstrom has worked wonders for the wives of several partners at my firm." The wives, Abigail echoed, the words bitter on her tongue. "Is that all I am to you now? An extension of your professional image?" Jacob had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant. Isn't it, though? When was the last time you asked about my research, my goals? When was the last time you saw me as anything other than an accessory to your success?" "You're being dramatic," Jacob said, reaching for his car keys. "We can talk about this later when you're in a more reasonable mood." But later never came. Jacob worked increasingly late hours, attended more business dinners without her, spent weekends on golf courses with clients rather than at home. When they were together, conversation was superficial. Discussions about household logistics, social engagements, financial decisions. The deep, passionate exchanges that had once defined their relationship were replaced by polite small talk and growing silences. Their physical relationship suffered as well. Jacob's critiques of her appearance created a wall of self-consciousness that Abigail couldn't scale. His touch, when it came at all, felt evaluative rather than loving, as if he were assessing her body rather than connecting with it. Sex became perfunctory when it happened at all, a mechanical act devoid of the intimacy and mutual discovery that had once made their physical connection so powerful. One night, after another rejection, Abigail found herself standing before the bathroom mirror, cataloguing her flaws through Jacob's eyes, the slight puffiness under her eyes from long work days, the natural texture of her hair that he preferred straightened, the curves of her body that never quite matched the willowy ideal he seemed to favor. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her, not because she had changed so dramatically, but because she had started seeing herself through the distorted lens he had created. "What happened to us?" she whispered to her. Reflection. The answer came in fragments over the following weeks. A text message on Jacob's phone from someone named Vanessa, worded with the familiarity of ongoing connection. A charge on their credit card statement for a hotel downtown on a night he'd claimed to be working late. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, subtle but unmistakable. Abigail didn't confront him immediately. Part of her didn't want confirmation of what she already suspected. Another part, the part that stunned her with its honesty, didn't care enough anymore to fight for a marriage that had already withered from neglect. Instead, she found herself having lunch with Maya, confiding the suspicions she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself. "Are you surprised?" Maya asked bluntly, stirring her iced tea with practiced nonchalance that didn't mask her concern. "I should be," Abigail admitted. "But no, it feels almost inevitable." "The question isn't whether he's cheating," Maya said, her voice gentle despite her direct words. "The question is why you're still there, letting him whittle away at your self-worth day after day." The soul. Words hit Abigail with unexpected force. She had been so focused on Jacob's betrayal, on his failure to honor their vows, that she hadn't fully recognized her own complicity in staying, despite his emotional abuse, his constant criticism, his gradual erasure of the woman she had once been. "I don't know who I am without him anymore," Abigail confessed, the realization painful in its truth. "We've been together for so long. Our lives are completely intertwined." "Bullshit," Maya said with the frankness of true friendship. You are Dr. Abigail Johnson, brilliant economist, advocate for underserved communities, incredible friend. You were all of those things before Jacob Kim, and you'll be all of those things after him. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Abigail felt something shift within her, a recognition of her own power, her own identity separate from the role she had assumed as Jacob's wife. It was terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping to the edge of a precipice and discovering you had wings you'd forgotten how to use. "What would you do?" Abigail asked quietly. Maya considered the question carefully. "I wouldn't make any decisions based on what he might or might not be doing with this Vanessa person. I'd make decisions based on what you need to be whole again, based on whether this marriage is nurturing the person you want to be or slowly killing her." That night, Abigail lay awake beside a sleeping Jacob, considering Maya's words. The answer was uncomfortable but undeniable. This marriage, once a source of strength and inspiration, had become a crucible of self-doubt and diminishment. The question wasn't whether Jacob was being faithful, it was whether she was being faithful to herself by remaining in a relationship that required her to become smaller, less authentic, less powerful. The realization didn't immediately translate to action. Abigail spent weeks gathering her courage, weighing her options, preparing herself for the seismic shift of walking away from 5 years of marriage. But the seed had been planted, and once she acknowledged the truth to herself, there was no returning to comfortable ignorance. The breaking point was approaching. All that remained was the catalyst, the final push that would transform understanding into action. Chapter 4. Walking Away. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in late autumn. Abigail had spent weeks preparing a presentation for a major economic forum. Her research on sustainable development in underserved communities had garnered attention from policymakers, and this was her chance to make a real impact. The forum would feature representatives from the World Bank, the IMF, and several international NGOs focused on economic equity. It was, without exaggeration, the most significant professional opportunity of her career. "I'd like you to come," she told Jacob over breakfast, trying to keep her voice casual despite the importance of the request. "It's important to me." Jacob barely looked up from his phone, his attention captured by market reports and client emails. "What time?" 7. "There's a reception after where I'll need to network. The Director of Global Initiatives for the UN Development Program specifically requested to meet me." "I'll try," he said, a non-committal response that they both knew meant no. There was no calendar check, no genuine consideration, just the automatic deferral that had become his standard response to anything involving her career. Abigail felt a familiar, hollow feeling in her chest, but pushed it aside. Tonight was about her work, her contribution, her voice in conversations that mattered. She wouldn't allow his indifference to diminish that. That evening, Abigail stood at the podium, her research displayed behind her, and spoke with passion about economic justice. The audience was engaged, questions were thoughtful, and afterward, several prominent economists approached her to discuss collaboration. Dr. Eleanor Winters, whose work had inspired Abigail since her undergraduate days, spent 30 minutes discussing potential partnership opportunities. "Your perspective on community-led development is exactly what's been missing from the conversation," Dr. Winters told her, pressing a business card into Abigail's hand. "I'd like you to consider joining our advisory board for the Asian Development Initiative." It was the proudest moment of her professional life, and she celebrated it alone. The reception afterward was filled with congratulations and meaningful conversations about implementing her research models. Several times, Abigail caught herself scanning the room for Jacob, hoping against reason that he might have decided to come after all, might have recognized the significance of this moment in her career. He never appeared. When she arrived home, Jacob was watching television, a glass of scotch in hand. The penthouse was dark, except for the blue glow of the screen, casting harsh shadows across his features. He didn't turn when she entered, though the sound of her heels on the marble floor announced her presence. "How was your thing?" he asked vaguely, after she'd stood in silence for nearly a minute, waiting for acknowledgement. "It was important to me," Abigail said quietly, setting down her portfolio and removing her coat. "You knew that." "I had a client emergency. We can't all choose our hours, like academics." The dismissal was casual, practiced, a familiar diminishment of her work that he no longer even seemed aware of making. "I'm not an academic. I'm a policy researcher," she corrected. An old argument. And this wasn't a routine lecture. This was... "You look tired," Jacob interrupted, his gaze finally turning toward her, though his eyes didn't meet hers directly. Instead, they assessed, evaluated, catalogued perceived flaws. "You should try that new serum I bought you. The dark circles under your eyes are really noticeable." Abigail stood very still, something crystallizing inside her. This moment, this simple, mundane exchange, suddenly encapsulated everything that had gone wrong between them. On the night of her greatest professional triumph, all he could see were the shadows beneath her eyes. "Do you even hear yourself?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling she felt in her core. "What?" Jacob looked genuinely confused. The scotch glass paused halfway to his lips. "I achieved something significant today, something that matters. The UN Development Program wants my input on their global initiatives. Dr. Eleanor Winters invited me to join an international advisory board. And all you can comment on is how I look. I'm just trying to help." "No," Abigail said firmly, the word cutting through his excuse with precision. "You're trying to mold me into someone I'm not, someone I don't want to be. You're trying to make me into an accessory for your life, rather than a person with my own goals, my own achievements, my own worth." Jacob set down his glass, his expression hardening. "That's not fair, Abigail. I've supported your career from the beginning. I introduced you to half the people in your professional network. You introduced me as your wife, not as Dr. Johnson, not as an economist, not as a researcher. As an extension of yourself." The realization wasn't new, but articulating it so clearly was liberating. "When was the last time you actually asked about my work? When was the last time you saw me as a colleague rather than a project?" The argument escalated, old wounds reopened. Jacob called her ungrateful, sensitive, unreasonable. Abigail called him shallow, controlling, blind. They circled each other in the spacious living room, voices rising and falling, accusations layered upon justifications, layered upon defenses. It was an old dance, but tonight the music had changed. Abigail felt a clarity she hadn't before, a recognition that this pattern would never change, because Jacob didn't see it as a problem. "Maybe we need some time apart," she finally said, exhausted by the circular conversation that was leading nowhere. "Maybe we do," Jacob agreed, his voice cold. "Maybe you need some perspective on everything I've done for you." That final phrase, "everything I've done for you," settled over Abigail like a weight being placed on her chest. It crystallized the fundamental disconnect in how they viewed their relationship. In Jacob's mind, he had elevated her, improved her, granted her access to a world she wouldn't have reached on her own. The possibility that she had brought equal value to the partnership, that her success was her own achievement, seemed inconceivable to him. "I'll stay at Maya's tonight," Abigail said quietly, already moving toward their bedroom to pack an overnight bag. "We can talk tomorrow when we're both calmer." Jacob didn't respond, returning his attention to his scotch and the television, as if the conversation and her departure were of minimal consequence. That night, lying awake in Maya's guest room, Abigail made her decision. This wasn't about needing space or time to think. This was about recognizing that the marriage had become fundamentally incompatible with her sense of self, with her dignity, with her right to be valued for who she was, rather than how she appeared. The next morning, while Jacob was at work, Abigail returned to the penthouse. She packed methodically, taking only what was truly hers: clothes she had chosen, books that mattered to her, research materials, the few mementos from her childhood and university days that she had managed to preserve in the sleek, curated space Jacob preferred. She wandered through the penthouse that had never felt like home, collecting the pieces of herself that remained. In the kitchen, she found a shopping list in Jacob's handwriting: Abby, hair apt, facial products, new, dress for Stevenson dinner, not requests or suggestions, but directives, another project plan for improving his wife. The casual presumption that her appearance was his to manage strengthened her resolve. In their bedroom, she paused before the full-length mirror, where she had examined herself countless times through Jacob's critical eyes. The woman who looked back at her now was tired but resolute, bearing the weight of decisions too long deferred, but finally made. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note: "I need to find myself again. Please don't contact me." There was more she could have said: explanations, recriminations, farewells, but ultimately it came down to this simple truth. She needed to rediscover the woman who had been slowly disappearing beneath the weight of Jacob's expectations and criticisms. As she closed the door of the penthouse behind her, Abigail felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for what had been lost, fear of the unknown future, but above all, a profound sense of relief. The burden of constantly falling short, of never being enough despite her best efforts, had been lifted. Whatever came next would at least be authentically hers. She had already arranged to stay with Maya temporarily, though temporarily had no defined end date. One night, a week, a month, however long it took to rebuild her sense of self, to remember who she was, separate from Jacob's definition. The taxi ride to Maya's suburban home felt like crossing a border into a new country, one where she wasn't primarily Jacob Kim's wife, but simply Abigail Johnson, a woman in the process of reclamation. The neighborhoods changed as they drove, from the gleaming high-rises of the financial district to the tree-lined streets of Maya's established community, a physical manifestation of the journey Abigail was undertaking from performative perfection to authentic living. Maya was waiting on the porch of her craftsman bungalow when the taxi pulled up, arms crossed against the early autumn chill. She didn't ask questions when she saw Abigail's tear-stained face, just pulled her into a fierce, "Ugh, you're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters." That night, curled on Maya's guest room bed, Abigail's phone lit up with text after text from Jacob, expressions of confusion that quickly turned to anger, then bargaining, then something approaching genuine regret. She read each one without responding, watching the progression of his emotions with a detachment that would have been impossible just days before. "Where are you? We need to talk about this like adults. You're being dramatic. Just come home so we can sort this out." "I'm sorry if I hurt you. That was never my intention. Please, Abby, I love you. We can fix this. At least let me know you're safe." The last one nearly broke her resolve. There was genuine concern there, a reminder of the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had been gradually replaced by the critical stranger she had left behind. She typed a brief response: "I'm safe. I need space. Please respect that." Then she turned off her phone and for the first time in years, slept without worrying about the expression on her face as she dreamed, without the subconscious tension of knowing she would be evaluated in the morning. When Jacob returned that evening to an empty house, his first feeling wasn't despair or longing. It was relief. The admission shocked him, a momentary glimpse of honesty in the midst of appropriate reactions, concern, confusion, anger. But it was there, undeniable in its clarity. Relief. Relief that he no longer had to pretend that nothing had changed between them. Relief from the constant disappointment when Abigail failed to transform into the partner he had decided she should be. Relief from the exhausting cycle of criticism and appeasement that had replaced genuine connection. He moved through the empty penthouse, noticing the spaces where Abigail's presence had been erased, her books missing from the shelves, her laptop gone from the desk, the framed photo of her graduation day no longer on the side table. These absences should have pained him, but instead they felt like a confession, evidence of how little of her had been welcomed in this space to begin with. In the bathroom, her side of the vanity was bare, cleared of the creams and serums he'd insisted she use, the makeup he'd suggested would enhance her features, the hair products that had promised to tame her natural curls. He opened the medicine cabinet and found only his own carefully arranged grooming supplies, each in its designated place. Had he really spent so much energy trying to change her appearance? The emptiness confronted him with possibilities he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The recognition was fleeting, quickly buried beneath more acceptable emotions. He called her friends, her colleagues, even her mother, who answered coolly, "She'll contact you when she's ready, if she's ever ready." He sent texts that received only that single, maddeningly calm response. He alternated between fury at her impulsive decision and concern for her well-being. But late that night, as he lay alone in their king-sized bed, the relief returned, alongside something more unsettling, recognition of his own role in destroying what had once been beautiful between them. For a brief, painful moment, Jacob saw himself clearly. The constant criticism, the subtle undermining, the slow erosion of Abigail's confidence and identity. He saw how he had aimed to elevate her in his warped understanding of the word by first tearing her down. "I was trying to help her," he whispered to the empty room, but even to his own ears the justification sounded hollow. Help her what? Become someone she had never wanted to be, conform to standards that had nothing to do with her values, her goals, her authentic self. The moment of clarity was uncomfortable, threatening the narrative he had constructed for himself as the supportive husband, the success story, the man who had it all. By morning, he had reframed Abigail's departure as a temporary breakdown, a failure on her part rather than his. It was the only way he could face his colleagues, his friends, himself. 3 days after Abigail left, Jacob replaced her wedding ring with his own note, "When you're ready to be reasonable, I'll be here." But even as he wrote the words, a small voice whispered that she wouldn't be back, not to this house, not to this marriage, not to the man he had become. And in the silence of the empty penthouse, he couldn't entirely silence the insidious thought that he had gotten exactly what he deserved. Chapter 5. Transformation begins. Abigail moved into Maya Wilson's guest house, a charming converted garage, behind the main residence that offered privacy without isolation. Dr. Maya Wilson wasn't just any friend. She was a world-renowned dermatologist whose clinic catered to celebrities and socialites. More importantly, she had been Abigail's roommate in undergraduate days, before either of them had achieved professional success. They had met as freshmen, assigned to the same dormitory room. Maya, the ambitious pre-med student from a wealthy San Francisco family, and Abigail, the economics major on full scholarship from Chicago's South Side. Their differences could have created distance, but instead they'd found common ground as women determined to excel in their respective fields despite the barriers society placed before them. Maya as a woman in medicine, Abigail as a black woman in economics. "Stay as long as you need," Maya insisted, helping Abigail unpack the few belongings she'd brought. The guest house was simply furnished but comfortable, with a small kitchen, a living area with a pull-out sofa, and a bedroom with an adjoining bath. French doors opened onto Maya's garden, where a stone path led to the main house. "That man never deserved you." "I don't know about that," Abigail replied, carefully arranging her books on the small desk by the window. "He was different when we met. Or maybe I just saw what I wanted to see." "People show you who they are eventually," Maya said, her voice softened by compassion rather than judgment. "The important thing is that you recognized it and had the courage to leave." For the first week, Abigail barely left the guest house. She took a leave of absence from the think tank, citing personal matters, and declined calls from colleagues curious about her sudden disappearance. She slept, cried, and questioned every decision she'd made in the past 5 years. Had she compromised too much? Had she lost herself trying to be what Jacob wanted? Had she betrayed her own potential by allowing his vision of her to override her authentic self? Her phone remained mostly off, though she checked it occasionally to ensure no professional emergencies required her attention. Jacob's messages continued, sometimes apologetic, sometimes accusatory, sometimes pleading. She read them all but responded to none, knowing that any engagement would only pull her back into the cycle of justification and defense that had characterized their final months together. On the 8th day, Maya knocked on her door with 2 cups of coffee and no patience for further wallowing. "Enough," she said firmly, setting a coffee in front of Abigail, who was curled on the sofa in the same sweatpants she'd been wearing for 3 days. "You're brilliant, you're kind, and you're hiding." "I'm regrouping," Abigail corrected, reaching gratefully for the coffee. Despite her disheveled appearance, she'd been productive in her isolation, writing in her journal, reading articles she'd bookmarked months ago but never had time for, and gradually reconnecting with her own thoughts without Jacob's filtering influence. "You're avoiding the world because a man convinced you that you weren't enough," Maya countered, perching on the arm of the sofa. "I'm not having it. Get dressed. You're coming to my clinic today. Maya, I appreciate—" "No arguments. My 9 o'clock cancelled. I have a gap in my schedule. You need to get out of this house, and I need your brain." Maya's tone was brisk, but her eyes were kind. "I'm developing a new approach to skincare for women of color, and I could use an economist's perspective on market barriers." It was a transparent attempt to engage Abigail's professional mind, to remind her of her value beyond her failed marriage. And despite seeing through the strategy, Abigail found herself responding to it. "Give me 20 minutes to shower," she conceded. Reluctantly, Abigail followed Maya to her upscale dermatology practice in an elegant medical building downtown. The clinic's waiting room was a study in understated luxury. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, art by local artists on the walls. It was welcoming without being intimidating, professional without being clinical. While Maya saw patients, Abigail sat in her office, answering emails and half-heartedly updating her resume. She'd taken a leave of absence from the think tank, uncertain whether returning to the same professional circles where she might encounter Jacob was the right next step. Perhaps it was time for a change. A new challenge, a new environment, a fresh start uncontaminated by associations with her marriage. During a break between appointments, Maya returned with a sleek folder. "I've been thinking about your situation." "My situation being my failed marriage or my bruised ego?" Abigail asked dryly, though there was no real bite to her words. Maya had earned the right to directness through years of loyal friendship. "Your situation being that you've forgotten who you are." Maya said, settling into the chair behind her desk. I've watched you shrink over the past few years, not physically, but energetically. The Abigail I knew in college never apologized for her brilliance, never dimmed her light to make others comfortable. Jacob didn't just criticize your appearance, he diminished your spirit. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Abigail had been so focused on the superficial aspects of Jacob's criticism, the comments about her hair, her skin, her clothing, that she had almost missed the more fundamental erosion of her confidence, her voice, her presence in the world. I'm not suggesting you need to change yourself, Maya continued, but I am suggesting that rediscovering your confidence might start with taking care of yourself in ways you've neglected. She opened the folder to reveal a comprehensive skincare regimen, diet plan, and exercise schedule, not the punishing, restrictive programs Jacob had pushed, but a holistic approach focused on health, well-being, and authentic self-care. This isn't about becoming someone else, Maya explained, her professional expertise evident in the carefully considered recommendations. It's about revealing the person you've always been, the one Jacob's criticism buried. It's about feeling good in your own skin again, physically and metaphorically. Abigail stared at the plan skeptically, flipping through pages that detailed recommended skincare ingredients, nutritional guidelines tailored to her specific needs, and gentle exercise routines designed to energize rather than exhaust. This feels like giving him what he wanted. No, Maya said firmly. This is about what you want. About feeling good in your own skin. About walking into a room and knowing you belong there. She paused, leaning forward to emphasize her point. Remember that professor in undergrad who told you economics wasn't for people like you? Did you change majors? Of course not. I worked harder and graduated top of the class. The memory brought a small smile to Abigail's face. Professor Harrington's dismissive assessment had only fueled her determination to excel, to prove not just that she belonged in economics, but that she could transform the field with her unique perspective. This is the same, not changing for others, but refusing to let them diminish you. Slowly, Abigail nodded, a spark of her old fighting spirit rekindling. Where do we start? The transformation began not with expensive treatments, but with basics. Proper hydration, a consistent sleep schedule, gentle cleansers that worked with her skin type rather than against it. Maya taught Abigail to read ingredient lists rather than marketing claims, to understand what her skin truly needed rather than what the beauty industry insisted was necessary. Your skin isn't problematic, Maya explained during their first official consultation, examining Abigail's face with professional care rather than critical assessment. You've just been using products designed for completely different skin types because that's what the beauty industry pushes. These harsh exfoliants Jacob kept buying you, they're actually damaging your natural moisture barrier. Maya's approach was fundamentally different from Jacob's. Where he had focused on flaws to be corrected, she emphasized strengths to be nurtured. Where he had pushed Abigail toward an impossible standard, Maya encouraged her to discover her own unique beauty. The goal isn't perfection, Maya reminded her, when Abigail caught herself slipping into old patterns of self-criticism, examining her reflection with the same harsh scrutiny Jacob had trained her to use. The goal is health, confidence, self-recognition when you look in the mirror. These small daily practices became rituals of reclamation, moments when Abigail could reconnect with her physical self after years of viewing her body as a project requiring constant improvement. The simple act of washing her face became meditative, an opportunity to look at herself with compassion rather than criticism. Alongside skincare came nutrition consultations with Dr. Eliza Chen, a specialist in integrative nutrition who approached food as medicine rather than enemy. The restrictive diets Jacob had encouraged were replaced with balanced meals that nourished Abigail's body and supported her natural beauty. Food isn't the enemy, Dr. Chen explained during their first session, reviewing the food journals Abigail had kept at Maya's request. Stress and self-criticism are far more damaging to your appearance and health than an occasional piece of chocolate. Your body has been in a state of constant restriction, which actually triggers inflammation and affects everything from your skin to your sleep quality. Instead of elimination and deprivation, Dr. Chen focused on addition: more colorful vegetables, more healthy fats, more pleasure in eating. Meals became enjoyable again, rather than exercises in self-control and mathematics, calculating calories and macronutrients with joyless precision. Most transformative were the weekly therapy sessions. Maya arranged with Dr. Harriet Coleman, a psychologist specializing in women's self-image and relationship trauma. Their first meeting took place in Dr. Coleman's warmly appointed office, where family photos shared space with academic credentials and carefully chosen artwork. When someone criticizes your appearance consistently, Dr. Coleman explained during their first session, her voice gentle but direct, you begin to see yourself through their eyes. Our goal is to reclaim your vision of yourself. These sessions were often the most challenging part of Abigail's week. Deconstructing the belief systems that had taken root during her marriage was painful, requiring her to acknowledge not only Jacob's manipulations, but also her own complicity in allowing his vision to supersede hers. I keep asking myself why I stayed so long, Abigail confessed during one particularly difficult session 3 weeks into their work together. Why I kept trying to change myself to meet his impossible standards. Why I accepted treatment that I would never tolerate from a colleague or friend. Because you believed in the relationship, Dr. Coleman suggested. In the potential you saw. In the beginning, there's no shame in that commitment, Abigail. The shame belongs to the person who exploited it. But I should have known better, Abigail insisted. I have a PhD in economics. I research power dynamics and resource allocation for a living. How did I not see the obvious power imbalance in my own marriage? Because cognitive understanding doesn't override emotional attachment, Dr. Coleman replied. Because changes that happen gradually can be nearly impossible to perceive when you're living inside them. And because Jacob was skilled at making his criticism sound like concern, at framing his control as care. Gradually, these conversations extended beyond her marriage to encompass broader questions of identity, purpose, and future direction. Who was Abigail Johnson when not defined by her relationship with Jacob Kim? What did she want from her life and career? What values would guide her choices moving forward? 2 months into her stay with Maya, Abigail received a text from Jacob. I miss you. Can we talk? Things haven't been the same without you. She showed it to Dr. Coleman during their next session, her finger hovering over the message as if it might burn her. Part of me wants to respond, she admitted, to explain why I left, why I can't come back, to make him understand what went wrong. And the other part? Dr. Coleman prompted, watching Abigail's expression carefully. Knows that. Any explanation would be twisted, used to pull me back into his narrative. That the only truly healthy response is silence. She set the phone down, decision made, that I don't owe him closure or understanding. Dr. Coleman nodded. When you were with Jacob, your voice was consistently undermined, your perspective dismissed. Sometimes reclaiming your power means choosing not to engage, not to offer parts of yourself to someone who has proven they don't value them. Abigail didn't respond to the text, nor to the flowers that arrived at Maya's clinic the following week, calla lilies, her favorite, with a card that read simply, I'm sorry. Nor to the email that appeared in her inbox, subject line, please read this, containing a long explanation of how he'd been reflecting on his behavior and wanted to make amends. Instead, she poured her energy into her own reconstruction, not just of her appearance, but of her sense of self, her professional identity, her understanding of her own worth separate from external validation. She reconnected with colleagues, began exploring new career opportunities, and gradually re-engaged with the work that had always been her true passion. "You're blooming," Maya observed one morning over breakfast, studying Abigail across the table. "Not just your skin, though that glow is definitely enviable, but all of you. You take up space differently now." Abigail considered this, recognizing the truth in the observation. She moved through the world with more confidence now, spoke without constantly monitoring her words for potential criticism, laughed without covering her mouth. The physical transformation, her skin healthier, her natural hair embraced, her body nourished rather than punished, was merely an outward manifestation of a deeper healing. "I feel like myself again," she said simply. "Or maybe for the first time. I understand the urgency. I'll complete chapters 6 to 10 in this single message, maintaining the same quality and 20% expanded length throughout." Chapter 6. Blooming. 3 months into her stay with Maya, Abigail barely recognized her reflection, not because her appearance had drastically changed, but because she was finally seeing herself clearly again. Her skin glowed with health, free from the harsh products Jacob had insisted she use. Her natural curls, which he had suggested she straighten, now formed a magnificent crown around her face. Her body, no longer subjected to extreme diets, had found its natural, strong shape. But the most significant transformation wasn't physical. It was the confidence in her eyes, the ease in her posture, the authenticity that radiated from her very being. "You look like yourself again," Maya observed one morning as they shared breakfast on the patio. The spring air was crisp but warming, much like Abigail's gradual re-emergence into the fullness of her life. "The self you were always meant to be." "I feel like myself," Abigail agreed, stirring honey into her tea. "Which is strange because I'm not sure I ever fully knew who that was before. That's the real tragedy of controlling relationships," Maya said, passing a plate of fresh fruit. "They don't just diminish who you are, they prevent you from discovering who you might become." Alongside the physical changes came professional evolution. Abigail had resumed her position at the think tank, though with clearer boundaries and a more focused direction. Her presentation at the Economic Forum, the one Jacob had missed, had continued to generate interest in her research. Dr. Eleanor Winters had kept her word, involving Abigail in the Asian Development Initiative and introducing her to key figures in international economic policy. Then came the unexpected offer. An email from the director of the Global Economic Empowerment Initiative, a prestigious international organization dedicated to implementing sustainable economic models in developing regions. "They've offered me a position," Abigail told Maya over dinner that evening, trying to contain her excitement, "leading a special initiative on economic empowerment in underserved communities." "That's incredible," Maya replied, genuinely delighted for her friend. "What would it involve?" "It would mean some travel," Abigail explained, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Geneva, Lagos, Singapore, working directly with community leaders to implement the models I've only theorized about until now. It's everything I've worked for." "You're taking it, right?" Maya asked, already knowing the answer from the light in Abigail's eyes. "I am," Abigail confirmed, a smile spreading across her face. "It's time to put theory into practice." The transformation wasn't just external or professional. Abigail moved differently now, with confidence, with purpose. She spoke more assertively in meetings. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. The woman who had almost disappeared beneath Jacob's criticism had not only re-emerged, but evolved into someone stronger, more defined, more authentically herself. Dr. Coleman had noted this shift in their therapy sessions. "You're no longer seeking external validation," she observed during their most recent appointment. "You're making choices based on internal values rather than anticipated approval." "It's liberating," Abigail admitted. "Exhausting sometimes, but liberating." As her departure date for Geneva approached, Abigail began looking for her own apartment. As grateful as she was for Maya's hospitality, she needed a space that was truly hers, not an extension of someone else's home, not a temporary refuge, but a place where she could continue building her new life. She found a loft in a converted factory downtown, exposed brick walls, high ceilings, enormous windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was nothing like the sleek, polished penthouse she had shared with Jacob. This space had character, history, a sense of authenticity that resonated with her rediscovered self. "It's perfect," Maya declared when Abigail showed her the space. "It feels like you." "That's exactly what I thought," Abigail agreed, running her hand along the rough texture of the brick wall. "It has good bones but needs some love. Like me when I showed up at your door." The apartment would be waiting for her return from Geneva, a symbol of permanence, of commitment to this new chapter of her life. The penthouse had never felt like home, despite its luxury and prestige. This loft, with its imperfections and character, already felt more like home than anywhere she had lived in years. One evening, as they prepared for a charity benefit supporting women's education, Abigail's first major social event since leaving. "Jacob," Maya watched her friend apply her makeup with practiced ease. There was something different in how Abigail approached this ritual now, not as armor against criticism, but as a form of self-expression, a celebration of her natural beauty rather than an attempt to correct perceived flaws. "I have something for you," Maya said, disappearing into her closet. She returned with a garment bag. "For tonight." Inside was a stunning burgundy gown, elegantly cut to accentuate Abigail's figure without revealing too much. The color complemented her skin tone perfectly, the fabric draped in a way that suggested both strength and grace. "Maya, this is too much." "It's not enough," Maya interrupted. "Tonight is your debut back into society, not as Jacob Kim's wife, but as Dr. Abigail Johnson, economic policy advisor and general badass." Abigail laughed, running her fingers over the luxurious fabric. "I don't know if I'm ready to face that world again. Jacob might be there." "That world better be ready for you," Maya replied with fierce loyalty. "And if Jacob is there, all the better. Let him see exactly what he lost." As Abigail slipped into the gown, she couldn't help but think about how differently she approached this evening compared to similar events during her marriage. Then she had dressed to meet Jacob's expectations, to avoid his criticism, to represent him appropriately. Tonight she dressed for herself, to feel confident, to celebrate her achievements, to honor the woman she had become. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was both familiar and new. The Abigail she had always been, beneath the layers of doubt and diminishment, now standing in her full power. "Ready?" Maya asked, adjusting her own elegant black dress. Abigail took a deep breath, feeling the culmination of months of healing, of growth, of reclamation. "More than ready." Neither of them could have known how prophetic those words would be. Chapter 7. The Fateful Encounter. The charity gala was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, an Art Deco masterpiece that housed the city's elite visitors. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, champagne flowed freely, and the city's most influential figures mingled between auction displays featuring artwork and luxury experiences, all to benefit women's education in underserved communities. Abigail entered on Maya's arm, momentarily overwhelmed by memories of similar events attended as Jacob's wife, the subtle pressure of his hand at her back guiding her toward the right people, his whispered reminders about her posture or expression, the constant awareness of being evaluated. She pushed these thoughts aside, reminding herself that tonight she entered this space on her own terms. Her burgundy gown caught the light as she descended the marble staircase, her presence commanding attention without seeking it. Several guests did double takes, some recognizing her from academic circles, others simply struck by her poise and the confident way she carried herself. "Dr. Johnson," called a distinguished older woman with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I was hoping you'd be here. Your paper on microfinance initiatives was revolutionary. The board can't stop talking about your approach." Abigail recognized Dr. Eleanor Winters, the renowned economist, who had become something of a mentor since the forum 6 months ago. "Dr. Winters, it's wonderful to see you again. How did the pilot program in Malaysia turn out?" Soon, Abigail was engaged in animated conversation with a group of economists and philanthropists, her passion for her work evident in every gesture. These weren't the superficial exchanges she'd endured at Jacob's side, where her intelligence had been treated as an inconvenient accessory rather than her defining attribute. Here, her mind was not just welcome but sought after. "You've lived this research," she was explaining to an interested foundation director. "Economic theory means nothing if it doesn't improve real lives. When local women controlled microfinance, distribution in Lagos, repayment rates increased by 47%, and sustainable businesses grew at twice the previous rate." She didn't notice the ripple of attention moving through the room as a new group arrived. Didn't see Jacob entering with his hand resting possessively on the lower back of a willowy blonde, whose designer dress seemed calculated to draw every eye in the room. It was Maya who spotted him first, her protective instincts immediately on alert. 12 o'clock, she muttered, during a brief lull in the conversation. "Don't look now." But it was too late. Abigail had turned at that exact moment, her eyes locking with Jacob's across the crowded room. For a heartbeat he didn't recognize her, his gaze passing over her before snapping back with sudden recognition. His eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth falling slightly open. The blonde beside him said something, tugging at his sleeve, but he seemed frozen. Abigail felt a momentary flutter of anxiety, quickly replaced by calm resolve. The woman who had once feared his judgment now stood in her own power, undiminished by his gaze. She didn't falter, didn't shrink. She finished her point, smiled at her colleagues, and excused herself gracefully. "I need some air," she told Maya, squeezing her friend's hand reassuringly. "I'll be fine." On the terrace, Abigail leaned against the stone balustrade, breathing deeply. The city lights sprawled before her, a canvas of possibilities. She had known this moment would come eventually. The city's social and professional circles were too intertwined for them to avoid each other forever. Still, the actuality of seeing Jacob again after 6 months sent unexpected tremors through her carefully constructed composure. Abigail. She didn't need to turn to know it was Jacob. His cologne, the same one he'd worn since they met, announced him before his voice confirmed his presence. "Jacob," she acknowledged, finally facing him. "I'm surprised to see you at an education, a charity event." He stood closer than social convention dictated, as if testing whether the magnetic pull that had once existed between them still lingered. The perfectly tailored tuxedo, the meticulously styled hair, the designer watch, all symbols of the success and status that had gradually superseded substance in his priorities. "New client," he explained, eyes never leaving her face, studying her with an intensity that would have once made her uncomfortable. The foundation is considering our firm for their investment portfolio. You look different. I look like myself, she corrected. Is that what you've been doing these past months? Reinventing yourself? Rediscovering myself, Abigail clarified. There's a difference. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. In the ballroom behind them, the string quartet played a melancholy piece that seemed to underscore the moment, the meeting of two people who had once been everything to each other, now separated by more than just physical distance. Jacob moved closer, his gaze traveling over her with an intensity that would have once made her uncomfortable. Now she stood her ground, neither shrinking from his assessment nor seeking his approval. "I've been trying to find you," he said, his voice lower, almost confessional. "Maya wouldn't tell me where you were. Your mother hung up on me. Your colleagues said they didn't know. It was like you'd disappeared completely. I asked them not to tell you," Abigail admitted. "I needed space." "Why? Was what we had so terrible that you needed to disappear completely?" Abigail considered him carefully. The Jacob before her seemed different too. Less polished somehow, more vulnerable. There were new lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that suggested the past months hadn't been easy for him either. "What we had," she said softly, "started as something beautiful, but it became something that was destroying me, bit by bit. I needed space to remember who I was, without your voice in my head, constantly telling me I wasn't enough." Jacob flinched. "I never said that." "You didn't have to. It was in every criticism, every suggestion for improvement, every comparison to other women you found more acceptable." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. In the distance, the city hummed with life, thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously, each as complex and painful and hopeful as their own. Jacob moved closer, lowering his voice. "I've missed you." "Have you?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious. "Or did you miss having someone to critique?" Jacob flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's unfair." "Is it?" Before he could answer, the blonde appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of annoyance and territorial anxiety. "Jacob, darling, they're about to start the auction. You promised to bid on the Hamptons weekend for my mother." "Give me a minute, Vanessa," Jacob replied, not looking away from Abigail. Vanessa hesitated, her gaze darting between them, clearly recognizing the intensity of the moment she had interrupted. "Don't be long," she said finally, retreating back into the ballroom. "Your date?" Abigail asked, no judgment in her tone. "A client's daughter," Jacob said quickly. "Nothing serious." "You don't owe me explanations, Jacob. We're separated, remember?" The word hung between them. Separated rather than divorced, a technical distinction that suddenly seemed significant. "I remember everything," Jacob said, his voice barely audible, "including the man I was when we met, the man who saw how extraordinary you are." Abigail felt a dangerous softening within her, a pull toward the shared history his words evoked. That man disappeared a long time ago. What if he's finding his way back? The question caught her off guard. Before she could formulate a response, Maya appeared at the terrace doorway. "Abigail, they're announcing the International Initiative winners. You should be inside." Jacob's expression shifted from vulnerability to confusion. "International Initiative?" "I've accepted a position leading an economic development program," Abigail explained. "I'll be traveling extensively, working with communities across several continents." "When were you going to tell me?" The presumption in his question that she owed him information about her life, her choices, rekindled Abigail's resolve. "I wasn't," she said simply. "Our lives are separate now, Jacob." She moved past him head high, back into the ballroom. For the remainder of the event, she felt his eyes following her, but she didn't acknowledge him again. As the evening wound down, Maya approached with 2 champagne flutes. "Ready to leave?" "Almost," Abigail replied, taking a glass. "I just want to make a quick donation." She made her way to the auction table, where she placed a generous bid on a painting that had caught her eye, a vibrant cityscape that reminded her of her childhood neighborhood. When she returned to find Maya, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Taking Vanessa upstairs. Room 1208. I need to clear my head." Jacob's voice slightly slurred. He'd been drinking heavily since their encounter on the terrace. Abigail shouldn't care. Their marriage was effectively over, and yet something compelled her to take the elevator to the 12th floor, to stand outside room 1208, to knock. Perhaps it was closure she sought, or confirmation that leaving had been the right decision. Perhaps it was simply the need to confront the reality of what their marriage had become, without illusions or self-deception. The scene that awaited her was exactly as described in the opening chapter. Jacob partially undressed, Vanessa on the bed, the room reeking of expensive scotch. The slap, the confrontation, the glimpse of draft texts never sent, all unfolded as before. But this time, as Abigail walked away, she understood the full context of her journey. From the young woman who had fallen in love with Jacob's mind, to the wife who had nearly disappeared under his criticism, to the woman who stood now in her own power, compassionate enough to feel pain at his betrayal, but strong enough to walk away from it. In the elevator, Maya waited, concern evident in her expression. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," Abigail replied, linking arms with her friend. "I'm free." As they crossed the lobby, Abigail felt Jacob's gaze from the mezzanine above. This time, she allowed herself one glance back, not in longing, but in acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here. Then she walked out into the night, toward a future entirely her own. Chapter 8. The Pursuit. The slap echoed in Jacob's mind long after Abigail disappeared down the hallway. He stood in the doorway of Suite 1208, his hand pressed to his cheek. The sting, a physical reminder of all he had lost. The moment played on repeat in his consciousness, the shock of seeing her, the humiliation of being caught, but most significantly, the recognition in her eyes. She had seen him completely, without illusions or excuses, and found him wanting. Behind him, Vanessa cleared her throat, the sound sharp with irritation. "I think I should go." Jacob barely noticed her gathering her things and slipping past. Him. His thoughts were consumed by Abigail, not just the transformed woman who had stood before him tonight, but the woman he had married, the woman whose spirit he had slowly crushed with his criticism and expectations. For the first time, he saw himself clearly, and the reflection was ugly. The realization sent him spiraling. For days afterward, he moved through his life in a fog, going through the motions at work, returning to an empty penthouse that no longer felt like home. Colleagues noticed his distraction, the uncharacteristic errors in presentations, the missed deadlines that had never been an issue before. "Everything okay at home?" his partner asked after a particularly disastrous client meeting. "Fine," Jacob replied automatically, though the lie was transparent. On the 7th day after the gala, he called Maya's office, desperation overriding pride. "Dr. Wilson's practice, how may I help you?" The receptionist's voice was professionally pleasant. "This is Jacob Kim. I need to speak with Abigail." There was a brief pause, then a cooling of tone that suggested his name had been recognized. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a patient by that name." "She's staying with Maya. Please, it's important." "I'll pass along the message, but I can't promise anything." Jacob waited by his phone all day, cancelling meetings, postponing calls, unable to focus on anything but the possibility of hearing Abigail's voice again. No call came. That evening, he found himself driving past Maya's house, slowing as he approached the stylish craftsman with its warm lights glowing through windows. Was Abigail inside, perhaps reading on the couch, her natural curls framing her face in the way he had once insisted she change? Had she found peace in the absence of his constant criticism? He didn't stop, didn't intrude. Something about the scene, the cozy domesticity so different from the cold perfection of their penthouse, made him recognize that he had no right to disrupt the sanctuary she had found. The next week, he sent flowers to Maya's clinic, a lush arrangement of calla lilies, Abigail's favorite. The card read simply, "I'm sorry for everything." They were returned the following day with a note in Maya's handwriting. "She doesn't want to see you." Desperate, Jacob appeared at the clinic in person, only to be firmly escorted out by security. "She needs time," Maya told him coldly before turning away. "Something you never gave her." The rejection stung, but it also carried a strange relief. Abigail wasn't giving in easily, wasn't allowing herself to be pulled back into the destructive patterns that had characterized their final years together. She was protecting herself, setting boundaries, demanding respect in absentia that he had failed to give her in presence. Jacob threw himself into learning, really learning, where he had gone wrong. He read books on emotional abuse, on unconscious bias, on the psychology of control. He joined a men's group focused on unlearning toxic behaviors. He started therapy with a counselor who specialized in relational patterns and personal transformation. "Why, now?" his therapist asked during their first session. "Why not when you were still together?" "Because I didn't see it then," Jacob admitted after a long pause. "I didn't see her. I was so focused on making her fit my image of the perfect wife that I lost sight of the extraordinary woman she actually was." Meanwhile, Abigail flourished. Jacob followed her career from afar, watching as she launched her international initiative to widespread acclaim. She traveled extensively, spoke at conferences, appeared in economic journals and occasionally mainstream media, discussing her innovative approaches to community development. From afar, Jacob watched her rise, pride and regret warring within him. He sent text messages to her number, not expecting responses, but needing to express the realizations that emerged from his ongoing work. "I understand now why you left. I'm sorry it took losing you to see what I was doing. Saw your interview on the Economics Today podcast. Your work is making a real difference. I'm proud of you, though I know that doesn't matter anymore. I'm in therapy, learning how much damage I've done, not just to you, but to myself, to what we could have been." Whether she read these messages, he didn't know. There were no responses, no indication that they reached anything but digital void. Still, the act of articulation helped crystallize his understanding, his regret, his hopes for her happiness, whether or not he was part of it. 3 months after the gala, Jacob made a significant change. He restructured his investment firm to focus on community development projects, targeting neighborhoods like the one where Abigail had grown up. He established a scholarship for young women of color interested in economics, deliberately naming it for Abigail's mother rather than Abigail herself, a recognition that her family's sacrifices had made her success possible long before he entered her life. "This is an unexpected direction," his business partner commented during the announcement of their new focus. "What inspired the change?" Jacob considered the question carefully. "Let's just say I've come to recognize that true value isn't always reflected in traditional balance sheets. There are communities with extraordinary potential that have been systematically denied the resources to realize it. I want to be part of changing that." He didn't publicize these changes as they related to Abigail. They weren't for show or to impress her or win her back. They were the actions of a man finally understanding the values his wife had always embodied, finally recognizing the wisdom in perspectives he had once dismissed. 4 months after the gala, Jacob sold the penthouse they had shared. Too many ghosts lived there. Too many moments of casual cruelty he couldn't unpaint from the walls. He purchased instead a modest house in a diverse neighborhood, filled it with books rather than status symbols, created a space that reflected authentic interests rather than calculated impressions. 5 months after the gala, Jacob's mother called him. "I saw Abigail on television," she said without preamble, "speaking about economic equity at the UN." "I saw it too," Jacob replied, waiting for criticism, for the implied "I told you so" about the marriage his parents had initially opposed. Instead, his mother was quiet for a moment before saying, "She was always too good for you. I see that now." The admission stunned him. "I know," he finally responded. "Fix it if you can," his mother advised. "Some mistakes can't be unmade, but some can be atoned for." 6 months after the gala, Jacob learned that Abigail would be speaking at a conference in their city. Without expectations, he bought a ticket, sitting in the back row as she delivered a powerful address on sustainable development models that honored indigenous knowledge systems while creating pathways for meaningful economic participation. She was magnificent, confident without arrogance, articulate without condescension, passionate without loss of precision. The audience hung on her words, particularly when she described specific implementations of her theories in communities from Lagos to Manila. This wasn't abstract academic discourse, but practical wisdom born of lived experience and rigorous research. When she finished to thunderous applause, he slipped out without approaching her. He had no right to intrude on her professional moment, to make her triumph about him in any way. Outside, rain fell in sheets. Jacob stood under the awning, watching attendees dash to waiting cars, when a familiar figure appeared beside him. "Maya told me you were here," Abigail said, not looking at him. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. He hadn't expected this moment, hadn't prepared for it. "Your speech was brilliant. Thank you." They stood in awkward silence, watching the rain create rivers in the gutters, the mundane providing cover for the extraordinary tension between them. "I got your texts," Abigail finally said. "I meant every word." "I know." She turned to face him fully. "That's why I'm here." The rain intensified, creating a curtain of water that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. In this small pocket of space and time, they were just Abigail and Jacob again. Not expert and audience, not estranged spouses, just two people who had once shared a dream of changing the world together. "I've changed," Jacob said quietly. "Or maybe I'm changing back to the person I was when we met, before success and status became more important than substance." "People don't change that easily," Abigail replied, caution in her voice despite the fact that she had sought him out. "No," he agreed. "They don't. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, facing who I became, what I did to us, to you." A car pulled up, splashing through puddles. Maya, waiting in the driver's seat, gave Abigail a questioning look through the rain-streaked window. "I should go," Abigail said. "Can we talk?" Jacob asked, careful not to reach for her, not to pressure her in any way. "Over coffee sometime?" "Neutral ground. I understand if you say no." Abigail studied him, looking for any sign of the manipulation that had characterized their final years together. Instead, she found something that had been missing for too long: genuine respect for her agency, her choices. "Okay," she said finally. "Coffee. Next week." As she hurried through the rain to Maya's waiting car, Jacob stood watching her go, hope unfurling cautiously in his chest. Not hope for reconciliation, he wasn't naive enough for that, but hope for understanding, for a chance to apologize properly, for some kind of closure that honored what they had once been to each other. He hadn't expected even this much. It was more than he deserved, and he knew it. Chapter 9. The Three Conditions. They found themselves in a quiet cafe downtown, far from their old haunts, neutral territory where neither had history or advantage. 2 cups of tea steamed between them, an echo of the countless conversations they'd shared over beverages in another lifetime. Jacob couldn't stop looking at Abigail, not because of her physical transformation, though that was undeniable, but because of the confidence that radiated from her, the self-possession he had helped diminish, but never fully extinguished. "You look well," he said, inadequate words for what he really meant. "You look like yourself, the self I should have cherished rather than tried to change." "I am well," Abigail confirmed. She didn't return the observation, though Jacob knew he looked anything but well. Thinner, more disheveled, shadows under his eyes that spoke of restless nights. "I've been angry for a long time," Abigail began. "At you, yes, but also at myself for allowing your opinion to matter so much." "The fault was mine," Jacob said quietly. "I've spent months trying to understand why I treated you that way, and there's no excuse, but there are reasons. My parents' impossible standards, my own insecurities, the toxic environment I was raised in." He met her eyes steadily. "None of which justify what I did to you." Abigail nodded slowly. "I've been on my own journey of understanding why I stayed so long, why I let someone else define my worth." "You're extraordinary," Jacob said, echoing words from their early days. "You always were. I was too blind to see it." "Flattery won't fix this, Jacob. It's not flattery. It's a truth I should have honored every day we were together." Abigail sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "Why are you really here? What do you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Jacob had rehearsed this moment countless times, yet now found himself struggling for words. "A second chance," he finally said. "Not because I deserve one, but because what we had, before I ruined it, was worth fighting for. And if I say no, then I'll respect your decision. I'll keep doing the work I need to do on myself, regardless." Abigail set down her cup with deliberate care. "I've thought about this moment, about what I would say if you ever truly understood what went wrong between us." Jacob waited, heart in his throat. "I'm willing to consider giving our relationship another chance," she said finally. "But I have conditions." "Anything," Jacob said immediately. "Don't agree until you hear them," Abigail cautioned. "There are 3 non-negotiable conditions." Jacob nodded, prepared for whatever she might ask. "First," Abigail began, "therapy. Not just individual therapy, which I understand you've already started, but couples therapy with a counselor who specializes in rebuilding after emotional abuse." "Agreed," Jacob said without hesitation. "Second, we start from scratch. Dating, separate residences, no physical intimacy until we've rebuilt trust. I need to know you want me for who I am, not what I look like or how I make you appear to others." This would be harder, but Jacob nodded. "I understand." "Third," Abigail said, her voice softening slightly, "I need your honest answer to a question. Ask me anything. If I were to wake up tomorrow back in the skin I lived in when you drove me away, before Maya's treatments, before the expensive clothes, would you still be sitting here asking for a second chance?" The question struck Jacob like a physical blow. It was the heart of everything, his shallow values, his misplaced priorities, the fundamental flaw in how he had loved her. The honest answer is that 6 months ago. No, he admitted, watching pain flicker across her face. But that's because 6 months ago, I was still the man who didn't deserve you. The man who couldn't see past surface appearances to the extraordinary person beneath. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. The man sitting before you now would cross oceans for one more conversation with you, regardless of what you looked like, because I finally understand what I lost. Not a trophy wife, but a partner, a brilliant mind, a compassionate heart, a woman who challenges me to be better than I am. Tears glistened in Abigail's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Pretty words. Let me prove them with actions, Jacob pleaded, day by day, for as long as it takes. After a long moment, Abigail nodded once. Actions, not words, she agreed, starting now. Over the weeks that followed, Jacob honored their agreement with meticulous care. Twice-weekly therapy sessions, both individual and as a couple, stripped away layers of harmful patterns, revealing the potential that had always existed between them. They dated again, rediscovering each other as if for the first time. Coffee shops, art galleries, long walks through parts of the city they had never explored together during their marriage. Conversations that stretched for hours, diving deeper than the superficial exchanges that had characterized their later years together. Jacob listened, really listened, as Abigail spoke about her work, her passions, her dreams for the global initiative she was building. He asked questions that showed genuine interest rather than evaluative judgment. He shared his own evolving thoughts about ethical investment, community development, the responsibility that came with privilege. I'm proud of you, he told her, after she returned from a particularly successful trip to Lagos. Not because your success reflects well on me, but because you're making a difference in exactly the way you always wanted to. The words were simple, but they represented a profound shift from seeing Abigail as an extension of himself to recognizing her as an autonomous being with her own path, her own purpose, her own definition of success. For her part, Abigail watched Jacob carefully, looking for signs of the old patterns re-emerging. Instead, she found a man in the process of genuine transformation, humbled but not broken, reflective but not self-pitying, determined to become worthy of trust again without expecting it as his due. When he spoke in therapy about his family's influence on his values, about the pressure to conform to certain standards of success and status, she found herself understanding him in ways she hadn't before, not excusing his behavior but seeing its origins more clearly. My father measured everything in appearance, Jacob explained during one session. The right schools, the right neighborhood, the right car. I internalized that so deeply that I stopped questioning it, started applying it to everything, including you. And now, their therapist prompted, now I'm learning to measure things differently, by impact rather than appearance, by substance rather than status. 3 months into their carefully structured reconciliation, Maya invited them both to dinner, a sign that even Abigail's fiercest protector was cautiously acknowledging Jacob's efforts. I still don't trust you, Maya told Jacob bluntly as they sat in her dining room. But I trust Abigail's judgment, and I see you trying. Thank you, Jacob said simply. I know I have a long way to go. Later that night, as he walked Abigail to her door, a new apartment she had chosen for herself, filled with books and art and plants, a space that reflected her authentic tastes rather than anyone else's expectations, Jacob felt a shift between them, a softening, a possibility. Would you like to come in? Abigail asked, the invitation weighted with significance. given their agreement to maintain emotional but not physical intimacy until they had rebuilt trust. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I want to see where this goes," she answered honestly. "I can't promise more than that." "That's more than enough," Jacob said, following her inside. They talked until dawn, curled at opposite ends of her comfortable couch, the physical distance between them gradually shrinking as the night progressed, until finally Abigail's head rested against his shoulder, his arm gently encircling her. "I never stopped loving you," Jacob confessed, as the first light of morning filtered through her curtains. "Even when I was destroying us, some part of me still loved you. I just forgot how to show it properly." Abigail lifted her head to meet his gaze. "I never stopped loving you either," she admitted, "but I had to love myself more." "As you should have," Jacob agreed, "as you always should." When he kissed her, it wasn't with passion or possession, but with reverence, a gentle acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them to this moment, of the work still ahead, of the fragile trust being rebuilt between them. Chapter 10. Love Rekindled. The small seaside cottage welcomed them with warm light as Jacob opened the door, gesturing for Abigail to enter first. The weekend getaway had been her suggestion, a chance to escape the city, to be together without the constant reminders of their past and the watchful eyes of friends. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the rustic charm of the place. Exposed wooden beams, comfortable furniture, and most importantly, windows that framed the ocean like living paintings. "I remembered how much you love the water," Jacob said, placing their bags by the door. "How you always said you felt most at peace by the sea." The fact that he remembered this detail, never spoken in years, but essential to who she was, touched Abigail deeply. It was another sign of the change in him, the attention he now paid to her authentic self, rather than the version he had once tried to create. 6 months had passed since they'd begun their careful reconciliation. 6 months of therapy, of honest conversations, of relearning each other. 6 months of Jacob proving, consistently and without expectation, that his transformation was genuine. He had supported her work without attempting to direct it, celebrated her successes without claiming credit, stood beside her as an equal partner rather than a controlling force. He had shown her, in 1,000 small ways and several significant ones, that he now valued her for exactly who she was. "I brought something," Jacob said, retrieving a wrapped package from his bag. "A housewarming gift of sorts." Abigail unwrapped it carefully to reveal a framed photograph, the two of them on their first date, sitting on a campus bench surrounded by autumn leaves, both laughing at some forgotten joke. Before status and appearance had corrupted their connection. Before criticism had replaced admiration. "Where did you find this?" she asked, tracing the edge of the frame. "Your mother had it. She was reluctant to give me anything, understandably. But when I explained what it meant, what I was trying to rebuild with you, she relented." The gesture moved Abigail. Not just the photograph itself, but the effort it represented, reaching out to her mother, who had every reason to despise him, humbling himself to reclaim this fragment of their beginning. "Thank you," she said softly, "for remembering who we were. And for seeing who we can be," Jacob added, his hand finding hers. They spent the day exploring the small coastal town, walking along the shore, browsing in local shops, sharing meals at seaside cafes. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cottage, where Jacob prepared dinner while Abigail built a fire in the stone hearth. The domesticity felt both familiar and entirely new, echoes of their early marriage blended with the people they had become, creating something that honored their history without being bound by its mistakes. Over dinner, they spoke of futures. Hers with the international initiative that was gaining momentum, his with the restructured investment firm now focused on community development. "I've been offered a position on the UN Economic Council," Abigail said, watching Jacob's reaction carefully. In their previous life, such news would have been met with calculations about status, about how her achievement reflected on him. Now his face showed only genuine pride. "That's extraordinary," he said. "Though not surprising, your work is changing how people think about economic development. It would mean more travel," she continued. "Geneva, primarily, but also field sites around the world." "I've been thinking about opening a European office anyway," Jacob replied. "Geneva would be perfect." The implication hung between them, that their futures might remain intertwined, that the separate paths they had been walking might once again converge. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Abigail said, setting down her glass. "I'm suggesting possibilities," Jacob answered carefully. "Not making assumptions. Your career comes first. I just want you to know that I'm willing to build my life around yours now, not the other way around." After dinner, they moved to the sofa before the fire, the crackling flames casting golden light across their faces as they continued talking, about dreams they'd once shared, about new ones they were discovering, about the work still to be, done in healing old wounds. "Do you think we can really start over?" Abigail asked as the fire burned low. "After everything?" "Not over," Jacob said thoughtfully. "I don't think we can or should erase our past, but forward, with clarity about what went wrong and determination not to repeat those mistakes. Yes, I believe we can do that." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle, questioning rather than demanding. "If that's what you want." Abigail studied him in the firelight, the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had nearly destroyed her, the man who had fought his way back to worthiness. The journey had changed them both, had forced growth neither would have chosen, but both now valued. "I want to try," she said finally, "not as your wife, not yet, but as your partner, your equal." "You've always been my equal," Jacob said. "I just forgot to honor that truth." The admission, simple but profound, broke something, open between them, a final barrier of hesitation, of self-protection. Abigail moved toward him, her hand rising to touch his face, tracing the contours that had once been as familiar as her own. "I love you," she whispered, the words both a declaration and a choice. "Not the man you were pretending to be, not the man who tried to remake me, but this man, the one who had the courage to change." Jacob's eyes glistened in the firelight. "I love you too, the real you, the only you worth loving." When their lips met, it wasn't with the hesitant tenderness of their recent reconnection, but with the passionate recognition of two people who had lost each other and fought their way back, who had seen the worst in each other and chosen to believe in the best, who had walked through fire and emerged stronger for the burning. Abigail felt herself surrendering to the moment, to the heat building between them. Jacob's hands tangled in her curls, the natural texture he now treasured rather than sought to change, as he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with an intensity that spoke of months of restraint, of desire held in check until trust could be rebuilt. "Are you sure?" he murmured against her lips, still careful not to assume, not to pressure. In answer, Abigail rose from the sofa, taking his hand and leading him toward the bedroom. No words were needed as they undressed each other slowly, reverently, rediscovering bodies that were both familiar and new. When they came together, it was with none of the performance or evaluation that had marred their later intimacy before the separation. Instead, there was only authenticity, desire and vulnerability in equal measure, passion fueled by genuine connection rather than obligation or habit. Afterward, lying tangled in each other, the sound of waves crashing against the shore providing a rhythmic soundtrack to their reunion, Abigail rested her head on Jacob's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "This isn't an ending," she murmured, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "It's a beginning." Jacob's arms tightened around her, his lips pressing against her forehead in silent agreement. They had found their way back to each other, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had become, scarred but healing, wiser for the pain, committed to building something true from the ashes of what had been lost. Outside, the moon painted silver across the restless sea, eternal in its rhythm of destruction and renewal. Inside, two people who had nearly lost everything held each other in the darkness, their bodies entwined, their futures once again bound together, not by obligation or appearance, but by choice, by understanding, by love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger, deeper, more passionate than before.